We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast?
Hey there folks, it's Blue here from Blue Bears Games, and this video will be the upgrade guide for the Food and Fellowship Lord of the Rings Commander Precon. This one was a little harder to find useful changes to suggest because of the varying themes that they tried to mash together. While I appreciate that WotC tries to jam different themes that may synergize well together, I find that most of the time, it's best to just keep it simple and focus on one or two themes that work well. Out of the box, they tried to mesh together life gain with soul sister effects and food tokens, while also trying a token go-wide theme that in theory may have sounded good on paper, but I feel it ultimately detracted from the overall idea of the deck. The direction that I will take for this guide is mostly to eliminate the token go-wide strategy with overrun effects, and focus more on the life gain and food token theme, but use them to somehow drain life from opponents along the way. The biggest downside to doing this is that it resulted in possibly the most total swaps I've done to date at 21 cards, so I better get to it. Real quick though, before I get to the guide, I want to take a moment to remind you that if you're in the market for a pretty awesome deck box, playmat, or sleeves, please visit our sponsor at arcane-fortress.com and take a look at what they have. Their deck boxes are some of the best I've ever used, and you can even get an additional 5% off of your entire purchase if you use discount code BLUEBEAR at checkout. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. I'll start by telling you which cards I'd suggest removing first. I'd remove 2 Forests, Exotic Orchard, and Commander Sphere because, as usual, there were too many mana sources right out of the box, and I'll be lowering the average mana cost of the deck by quite a bit. Hithlane Rope because I don't really like the idea of passing things to my opponents, but especially not something that could ramp them. Prize Pig because there are better cards for ramp when it comes to either mana dorks and or food tokens. Feasting Hobbit, Mentor of the Meek, Motivated Pony, Great Oak Guardian, Landroval Horizon Witness, Eagles of the North, and Call for Unity because, as I mentioned moments ago, I'm removing the go-wide theme, which includes the awkward overrun effects that this precon started with. Banquet Guests, Shire Sheriff, and Gollum Obsessed Stalker because I needed room for other cards that are better for the new direction I want to take this in. Generous Ent, Orchard Strider, and Woodfall Primus because I wanted to bring the average mana cost down and add more repeatable ways to do what these do. And finally, Crypt Incursion and Assemble the Ent Moot because they just don't do anything all that spectacular, and the replacements will end up being way more useful to the new, more honed-in food token theme. Like I said, it's a lot of cards to remove, but don't worry, the 21 cards I'm about to show you to replace them with will make this deck a little less frustrating to pilot and a lot more food token themed. Now, before I show you the cards that I would swap in, I want to remind you that if you want mana fixing land upgrade suggestions, check out the upgrade guide video that I did for the Forces of the Imperium Warhammer 40k precon. At the top of your screen is a link that you can use to go to the video, and I have timestamped the guide in the description of that video so you can easily find it after you're done watching this one. So now, let's talk about the cards that I would swap in. One of the main things I wanted to do was add ways to make food tokens repeatedly, so I'll suggest the following. The Shire, which is a land that has the ability to tap for green mana, or to simply just create a food token, which makes me wonder why wasn't this in the deck to begin with. Meriatic Brandybuck, which is a 2-mana 2/2 halfling that creates a food token whenever one or more halflings attack. There are enough halflings in the deck to make this card viable, and they included both lands that make creatures unblockable, so this card provides an easy way to create food tokens repeatedly without worrying about your halflings dying in combat. Apothecary White, which is a 3/4 legendary human cleric with vigilance and 2 other abilities that go great here. The first says whenever you attack, create a food token for each player that you're attacking. Then it also allows you to tap it and any amount of food tokens already in play to create X/1/1 human creature tokens, which will work really well with a couple of the cards I'm about to show you. Galadriel Gift Giver, which is a 5-mana 4/4 that when it attacks, you choose to put a +1/+1 counter on another creature or create either a food or a treasure token. Witch's Oven, which allows you to sacrifice a creature to create a food token, and if the creature you stacked had a toughness of 4 or more, you actually create 2 food tokens instead. And the last and newest card that can repeatedly create food tokens is Nuka-Cola Vending Machine. This card looks like it will be a lot of fun to play in a variety of different token-themed builds, and I can't wait to start playing with it. The next 2 cards I want to show you don't make food tokens on their own, but they do ramp up the amount of tokens that you make. First is Peregrine Took, which makes it so that anytime you create one or more of any token, you also create an additional food token. And the other card is Academy Manufacturer, which says that anytime you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, you create one of each of those instead. If you've never seen it in action, then take my word for it that this guy can get out of hand quickly in any deck that creates any of those 3 tokens. It can enable a lot of infinites as well, thanks to the treasure token that it creates. Now that we have some extra ways to make food tokens, let's look at some ways to take advantage of them besides just to gain life. We can use them for ramp with Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, which actually turns any token into a mana dork or mana rock. Or you can ramp with Knight of the Sweet's Revenge as well, but this card can also be sacrificed to buff all of your creatures now. You can also ramp with Eleanor Gardener, but Eleanor does it a little differently. This card allows you to search your library for a basic land card and put it directly onto the battlefield tapped at the beginning of your end step for just having sacrificed a food token for any reason during your turn. Speaking of gaining benefits for sacrificing a food token, I want to show you 5 cards that have various things that benefit you for doing so. First is Trail of Crumbs, which is an enchantment that says whenever you sacrifice a food, you may pay 1 mana, and if you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library and you may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand. Then put the rest of them on the bottom of your library in any order. Essentially, this is like scrying 2 and drawing a card anytime you sacrifice a food and pay the 1 mana. You can sacrifice a food to return Cauldron Familiar from your graveyard to the battlefield, which pairs really nicely with the Witch's Cauldron. You can also slowly bleed your opponent's health total with Nadier's Nightblade, simply for doing what they are supposed to do. The same is true of Agent of the Iron Throne, but the caveat is that you need one of your commanders in play to get that benefit. And the last card that I'll suggest that benefits from sacking food tokens is Dina Soulsteeper, who drains all of your opponents of 1 life every time you gain life. Dina's ability is not directly tied to sacrificing a token, but it is tied to what you sacrifice them for, which is to gain life. Bear in mind that this is a per life gain instance and not a per life point you gain effect. So if you sacrifice a food token to gain 3 life, you'll only drain an opponent of 1 life and not 3. And the last 3 cards that I'll suggest you add aren't tied to food specifically, but instead are just purely good utility for a deck like this. The first card is Witch of the Moors, which is a 5 mana 4/4 human warlock with Death Touch and an ability that says at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature and you return up to 1 creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Obviously this deck will gain a lot of life, so getting this trigger won't be an issue. I like it because it can get you back key pieces of different combos and synergies repeatedly that you may need throughout the game. It can also get you back those one-time food token creating creatures to recast later, and that could make all the difference in a longer game. Next is the Battle of Baywater, which is a 3 mana sorcery that is a limited board wipe that can give you a good number of food tokens. Most of the creatures in this deck are now under 3 power, so it may hurt you a lot less than it will hurt your opponents in this newly upgraded build. And the last card that I'll suggest before I go over the combo is Bolas's Citadel. Life is a resource that you may have an abundance of with this deck, so why not turn that resource into basically free spells? The Citadel lets you look at and play cards from the top of your library by using life to pay for the cost. The only downside to this card is that it's 6 to cast, with 3 of it being black mana, but hopefully the Chromatic Lantern and the ramp spells that they included make this a non-issue. And to wrap this whole thing up, I want to show you a combo that's perfect for the food theme. It's a 3-card combo that uses 1 card I showed you earlier and 2 cards that I haven't yet. Those cards are Cauldron Familiar, Samwise Gamgee, and Ashnod's Altar. All 3 cards must be on the battlefield along with at least 1 food token. Activate Ashnod's Altar by sacrificing Cauldron Familiar, adding 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Activate Cauldron Familiar by sacrificing a food, returning it from your graveyard to the battlefield. When Cauldron Familiar enters the battlefield, it and Samwise Gamgee will trigger their Enters the Battlefield abilities. Resolve the Cauldron Familiar's trigger, causing each opponent to lose 1 life and you to gain 1 life. Then, resolve the Samwise Gamgee's trigger, creating a food token. Simply rinse and repeat from there, and this combo will result in infinite colorless mana, death triggers, Enters the Battlefield triggers, life gain triggers, life loss, leaves the battlefield triggers, and infinite sacrifice triggers. Not too shabby for a 3-card combo using food tokens. Oh, and would you look at that, I did find a way to use food tokens to make people lose life. One thing to note about this combo is that the sack outlet can actually be any outlet that lets you sacrifice the cat for free, and instead of infinite colorless mana, it will result in whatever you get for the sacrifice. For instance, Altar of Dementia would result in infinite milling of target player's library. Another thing that I want to point out is that when I do these guides, I try to suggest cards that aren't normally auto-includes. That means that I won't suggest any of the numerous token doubling enchantments that these colors have access to, but adding them will essentially create some crazy infinite shenanigans that I won't get into. Just know that adding them would ramp the token making capability of this deck up by quite a bit. And that, my fellow spellslingers, was my upgrade guide for the Food and Fellowship Lord of the Rings Commander Precon. If you have any questions about anything I just went over, please don't hesitate to ask in the comment section. Lately, I had been wanting to do a food token themed deck for my 32 deck challenge, and I was kind of hoping that this precon would help me start one, but sadly, this is not even close to what I would want. The cards that I just suggested as upgrades for this deck, however, will help me in this venture way more than the precon will. Hopefully, the other Lord of the Rings precons are a little better than this one was. There are 3 more to go that I'll be doing over the next 3 weeks, so join me next week as I open another Lord of the Rings Commander precon. I'm not sure which one it will be just yet, so you'll just have to check back next Friday to find out which one I've chosen. As always, thanks for watching, and if you could, please do me the favor of giving the video a like, subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so yet, sharing this out to anyone you think would enjoy it or get something out of it, and visiting our sponsor at arcane-fortress.com and using discount code BLUEBEAR for an additional 5% off your order if you decide to purchase anything from them. Now go and watch some of my many other videos to tide you over until next week.